They told everyone she ran away. They said Lydia Sterling was a madwoman who wandered into the wilderness of the Arizona Territory to die. But that was a lie. A lie told by a man in a silk suit to cover up a murder that didn't quite happen. He left her in a rotting cabin with no food, no wood, and a door that wouldn't lock. He thought the winter would kill her. He thought the wolves would hide his sins. But he forgot one thing. The mountains have eyes. And when an Apache warrior named Taze kicked down that door, he didn't find a corpse. He found a war. This is the story of the girl who was forgotten and the warrior who remembered. The wind didn't just blow in the high country of the Arizona Territory. It screamed. It was a living thing, a white demon that tore at the skin and blinded the eyes. For Taze, a warrior of the Chiricahua Apache, the storm was not an enemy, but a blanket. The U.S. cavalry patrols didn't ride in weather like this. They sat by their pot-bellied stoves in Fort Bowie, drinking coffee and complaining about the savage land. Taze moved through the knee-deep drifts with the silence of a shadow. He was tracking a wounded elk, a beast that would feed his small band hiding in the Dragoon Mountains for weeks. But as he crested a ridge, the scent of the elk vanished, replaced by something foreign, the smell of coal smoke. Faint, dying, but there. He narrowed his eyes against the stinging sleet. Below, tucked into a ravine that barely saw the sun, stood a shack. It wasn't a proper homestead. It was a trapper's line shack, abandoned years ago, the roof sagging like a broken spine. No smoke rose from the chimney now. The smell was old. Caution slowed his approach. He held his Winchester rifle loose but ready. This could be a trap, a lure set by bounty hunters. He circled the structure, watching for tracks. There were none. The snow around the door was a smooth, untouched sheet of white. Whoever was inside hadn't come out in days. Maybe weeks. He reached the rough-hewn door. It was latched from the outside with a heavy wooden bar. Taze frowned. You latch a door from the outside to keep animals out, or to keep something in. He lifted the heavy bar and kicked the door open. The darkness inside was colder than the storm. The wind rushed past him, stirring up a swirl of ash from the cold fireplace. Taze stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. The cabin was bare, a broken table, a chair with one leg missing, and a pile of filthy rags in the corner. He turned to leave, disgusted by the waste, when the pile of rags moved. It was a small movement, just a shiver, but it was enough. Taze crossed the room in 2 strides. He pulled back a heavy, moth-eaten wool blanket and froze. It was a woman. Her skin was the color of blue milk. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her blonde hair matted with sweat and dirt. She was curled into a tight ball, her hands clutching a locket so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked dead, but a tiny puff of mist escaped her lips. She was a white eye, a settler. But she wasn't armed, and she looked nothing like the hard-bitten women who usually came to this territory. She wore a dress of fine blue silk, now torn and stained, utterly useless against the mountain freeze. Taze knelt. "Wake up," he said in broken English. Her eyes fluttered open. They were green, clouded with delirium. She didn't scream. She didn't recoil. She simply looked at the painted warrior, looming over her with a rifle, and whispered one word. "Arthur?" Taze shook his head. He saw the empty water bucket. He saw the walls stripped of moss where she had tried to eat the insulation to survive. This wasn't just starvation, this was an execution. Someone had locked her in here and waited for nature to do the dirty work. He pulled a strip of dried venison from his pouch and held it to her lips. She stared at it, her mind unable to comprehend food. He softened it with snow and pressed it into her mouth. She chewed weakly, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes, freezing instantly on her cheeks. She tried to speak again, her hand reaching out to grip his buckskin sleeve. "Don't. Let him. Take the boy." Taze looked around. The cabin was empty. "What boy?" he asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes rolled back, and she went limp. Taze stood up. The code of his people was complicated when it came to the White Eyes. They were the invaders. But to leave a woman to freeze in a locked cage? That was the work of a coward, and Taze despised cowards more than he hated the cavalry. He scooped her up. She weighed nothing, lighter than a bundle of dry sticks. He wrapped her in his own buffalo robe, kicked the door shut against the wind, and carried her out into the storm. He would not take her to the fort. They would shoot him on sight. He would take her to the only place safe, the Dragon's Throat Cave. Lydia Sterling dreamed of fire. She dreamed of the grand fireplace in the Sterling Manor in Tucson, where the logs crackled and the servants brought tea on silver trays. She dreamed of Arthur, standing by the mantel, looking handsome and severe, telling her that she was hysterical, that she needed rest. Then the fire turned cold. She was in the carriage, the windows blacked out, the rough hands of hired men dragging her, the long ride into the mountains, the sound of the heavy wooden bar dropping into place outside the door, the silence. She woke with a gasp, her body jerking upright. She wasn't in the cabin. She was lying on a bed of pine boughs and furs. Above her, rock walls stretched up to a soot-stained ceiling. A fire, a real hot fire, blazed in the center of the small cavern, casting dancing shadows against the stone. She scrambled backward, her back hitting the cold rock wall. "Arthur?" she croaked. "Drink." The voice was deep and came from the shadows. Lydia squinted. A man sat across the fire, sharpening a knife on a flat stone. He was terrifying. His hair was long and black, held back by a red cloth band. He wore buckskins and beads, and his face was painted with a stripe of ochre across the cheekbones. An Apache. Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. The stories the women in Tucson told in hushed tones, stories of scalping and torture, flooded her mind. She pulled the buffalo robe tighter around her neck. "Please," she whispered. "I have no money. My husband, he has the money." The warrior stopped sharpening the knife. He looked up, his dark eyes unreadable. He picked up a gourd dipper and extended it to her. "Drink. Willow bark. For the fever." Lydia hesitated. Her throat was like sandpaper. She crawled forward, trembling, and took the gourd. The liquid was bitter and hot, but it soothed the fire in her chest. She drank it all. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice stronger. "Safe," the warrior said. "I am Taze." "I am Lydia," she said. "Lydia Sterling." Taze nodded once. "Who locked the door, Lydia Sterling?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Lydia closed her eyes, the shame burning hotter than the fever. To admit it was to make it real. If she said it out loud, she couldn't pretend it was a mistake anymore. "My husband," she whispered. "Arthur Sterling." Taze didn't look surprised. He threw another stick on the fire. "Why?" "Because of the baby," she said, her hand instinctively going to her flat stomach. "He thinks I am barren. For 5 years, no child. He wants to marry the governor's daughter, a political match. But he couldn't divorce me. The church, society. It wouldn't allow it unless I was mad. Or dead." She looked at Taze, tears streaming down her face again. "He told everyone I lost my mind. He paid men to bring me here. He said it would be peaceful, just going to sleep in the snow." Taze looked at the fire. The white man builds big houses to hide small hearts. I have to go back, Lydia said, a sudden panic rising. You don't understand. I lied to you. Tarzay raised an eyebrow. I'm not barren, she sobbed. I found out 2 weeks before he took me. I tried to tell him, but he wouldn't listen. He had already signed the papers for the new marriage. He threw me in that carriage before I could show him the doctor's note. Tarzay stared at her. This woman carried a life inside her, a life her own father had tried to extinguish for the sake of politics and a new bride. The cruelty of it made Tarzay's blood boil. He will think you are dead, Tarzay said. By spring, the wolves would have left nothing. He has the deed, Lydia said, her voice shaking. The ranch, the land. It was my father's. It's in my name. If I die, Arthur gets it all. If I live, he gets nothing. That's why he couldn't just divorce me. Tarzay stood up. He walked to the entrance of the cave, looking out at the swirling snow. The storm was breaking. Rest, Lydia Sterling, Tarzay said. Tomorrow you do not go back to die. Tomorrow we teach you to live. 3 weeks passed. The winter in the Dragoon Mountains was unforgiving, but inside the cave a strange alliance was forming. Tarzay did not treat Lydia like a fragile doll. Once her fever broke and her strength returned, he put her to work. He taught her how to scrape hides, how to identify which roots were edible and which would stop her heart, and how to walk on the snow without breaking the crust. Lydia Sterling, the socialite from Tucson who had never washed her own dishes, was gone. In her place was a woman with calloused hands, wearing a modified buckskin dress, her blonde hair braided tight against her head. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Tarzay handed her a heavy Colt revolver. It was old, the metal pitted, likely taken from a dead soldier. It kicks like a mule, Tarzay said. Hold it with 2 hands. Lydia weighed the gun in her hands. Why are you doing this, Tarzay? Why didn't you leave me, or trade me to the fort? Tarzay poked the fire with a stick. My sister, he said quietly. 10 winters ago. Soldiers took her. Said she was a spy. They locked her in a wagon without water. She died before they reached the fort. He looked at Lydia. I could not save her. I can save you. Lydia reached out and touched his hand. It was the first time she had initiated contact. Arthur isn't just a rancher, she said. He's building a coalition. He has Sheriff Grady in his pocket. He has Judge Pendergast on his payroll. If we go back, it won't be just Arthur we fight. It will be the law. The law is a piece of paper, Tarzay said. Justice is a bullet. I need to get to the bank in Tucson, Lydia plotted, her eyes narrowing. My father left a copy of the deed in a safety deposit box. Arthur thinks he burned the only copy at the house. If I can get that deed and get to the U.S. Marshal Dillon, a man Arthur can't bribe, I can prove the land is mine. I can strip him of everything. Tucson is far, Tarzay said, and Arthur Sterling will have mourned you by now. If he sees a ghost, he will shoot first. Then I won't go as Lydia Sterling, she said, looking at her reflection in a pool of water in the corner of the cave. She touched her face, thinner now, harder. Lydia Sterling is dead. She died in that cabin. Suddenly, the sound of a horse, whinnying, echoed from the canyon below. Tarzay was on his feet instantly, dousing the fire with a handful of dirt. The cave plunged into darkness. He moved to the entrance, signaling Lydia to stay back. Below them, on the narrow trail, 3 men on horseback were picking their way through the snow. They weren't Apaches. They wore heavy dusters and wide-brimmed hats. Tracks, one of the men shouted, his voice carrying in the thin air. Fresh elk tracks. And look here, boot prints, small ones. Lydia crept to Tarzay's side. She peered down. Her blood ran cold. The man leading the group was a giant of a man with a red beard. She knew him. "That's Silas Pike," she whispered, terror gripping her throat. "Arthur's foreman, the man who locked the door." Tarzay jacked around into his Winchester. "He is coming to check his work, to make sure the winter did its job. If he finds us—" "He won't find us," Tarzay said, his voice a low growl. "He found the wolf's den. Now he meets the wolf." Tarzay turned to her. "Can you shoot that pistol, Lydia?" Lydia looked at the heavy iron in her hand. She thought of the cold cabin. She thought of her unborn child. She thought of Arthur laughing with the governor's daughter while she froze. She cocked the hammer. The click sounded like a thunderclap in the cave. "I can shoot," she said. The three riders moved slowly up the trail. Silas Pike was a man who enjoyed his work, usually, but checking for the corpse of his boss's wife was grim business, even for him. Arthur Sterling had paid him $500 in gold to ensure the job was finished before the spring thaw revealed the cabin to prospectors. "Boss, I don't like this," the second rider, a nervous kid named Billy, muttered. "This is Apache country." "Shut your mouth, Billy," Silas growled. "Apaches are down in Mexico for the winter. Ain't nothing here but ghosts." A shot rang out. The hat flew off the head of the third rider, a hired gun named Dutch. He yelped and scrambled off his horse, diving behind a boulder. "Ambush!" Silas roared, pulling his rifle from the scabbard. "Get down!" High above, Tarzay moved positions instantly. He didn't shoot to kill. Not yet. He wanted them confused. He wanted them separated. "Stay here," Tarzay commanded Lydia. "Watch the trail. If anyone comes up that rise, you shoot." Tarzay slipped over the edge of the cliff, descending the rock face like a spider. He dropped into the snow 20 feet behind the men. Silas was firing wildly at the cave entrance. "Come out, you rats! We got you surrounded!" Tarzay rose from the snow, his knife in hand. He grabbed Dutch, who was cowering behind the rock, and pulled him backward. Dutch didn't even have time to scream before Tarzay's hilt struck his temple, knocking him cold. Billy saw it. He screamed, "Behind us! They're behind us!" and fired his pistol into the trees. Silas spun around, leveling his rifle at Tarzay. But Tarzay was already moving, weaving through the trees. Silas fired, the bullet chipping bark inches from Tarzay's head. "I see you, Indian!" Silas yelled. "I'm going to mount your head on my wall." While Silas was distracted by Tarzay, he forgot to watch the high ground. Lydia watched through the sights of the Colt. Her hands were shaking. "That man locked me in a box to die." She took a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The gun roared and bucked violently in her hand. The bullet missed Silas, but it struck the rock right next to his horse's hoof. The horse reared, terrified. Silas was thrown from the saddle, landing hard in a snowbank. Tarzay was on him in a second. He pinned Silas to the ground, the tip of his knife pressing against the big man's throat. "Don't move!" Tarzay hissed. Silas went rigid, his eyes wide with shock. You're that Apache stray." "And you are the man who kills women," Tarzay said. "I didn't kill her!" Silas sputtered, desperate. "I just left her. It was Sterling. He made me do it." "Where is he?" Lydia's voice rang out. Silas froze. He looked up toward the rocks. Lydia Sterling was standing on the ledge, looking down at him like an avenging angel. She wasn't the weeping, broken woman he had dragged out of the house. She looked like a queen of the wilderness. "Mrs. Sterling," Silas gasped. You're alive?" "Where is he?" she repeated, aiming the pistol down at him. "Tucson," Silas stammered. "The wedding. It's in 3 days. He's marrying Eleanor Vance. He thinks you're dead, I swear." 3 days. Lydia looked at Tarzay. They exchanged a look of grim understanding. "Tie them up," Lydia said. her voice hard as steel. "We're taking their horses." "What are you going to do?" Silas asked, eyeing the knife at his throat. Lydia climbed down the rocks, walking until she stood over the man who had tried to murder her. She leaned in close. "I'm going to crash a wedding." The ride out of the Dragoon Mountains was a brutal descent from the frozen heavens into the dusty hell of the lowlands. They pushed the stolen horses hard, the animals snorting steam into the frigid air. Time was a luxury they didn't have. 3 days. 3 days until Arthur Sterling erased Lydia's existence with a wedding vow to another woman. Lydia rode with a grim determination that surprised even Tarzay. The soft socialite who had fainted at the sight of blood was gone. In her place rode a woman who learned to sleep in the saddle, who ate dried meat without complaint, and whose eyes constantly scanned the horizon for danger. The wilderness had stripped away the veneer of civilization, leaving something raw and unbreakable underneath. On the second day, they reached the outskirts of Benson, a dusty waypoint on the stagecoach line, teeming with prospectors, whores, and travelers desperate for a bath. They reined in on a ridge overlooking the town. The noise of the settlement, a piano tinny and out of tune, the shouting of mule drivers, the barking of dogs, drifted up to them. "I cannot go down there," Tarzay said, his voice low. "A Chiricahua in Benson is a dead Chiricahua before his feet touch the dirt. The scalp hunters are thick here." Lydia looked at him, then down at herself. She was wearing stained buckskins, her hair braided like an Apache squaw, her face darkened by the sun and wood smoke. "And I can't walk into the Cathedral of St. Augustine in Tucson looking like this," she said. "If Arthur sees me before I'm ready, he'll have me dragged away to an asylum before I can speak a word. I need clothes. I need to become Mrs. Sterling again. For a few hours at least." Tarzay nodded slowly. He reached into his pouch and pulled out 3 gold coins, Spanish reales, taken from a dead Comanchero years ago. He placed them in her palm. "The trading post at the edge of town. Go alone. Be swift. Do not let the mask slip." Lydia took the coins. They felt heavy, heavier than the Colt revolver tucked into her waistband beneath the buckskin shirt. "I'll be back before sundown." She rode down alone. The stairs started as soon as she hit the main street. Men on boardwalks stopped spitting tobacco to gawk at the wild-looking white woman riding a high-quality mare. Lydia kept her chin down, pulling the buffalo robe tight around her shoulders to hide the pistol. She hitched the horse outside, Croft's Dry Goods and Supplies. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. The interior smelled of pickled eggs, sawdust, and cheap perfume. Jebediah Croft, a man with grease in his beard and eyes like 2 watery beads, looked up from the counter. He squinted at her, taking in the ragged attire. "We don't serve beggars or squaws," Croft sneered, spitting onto the floorboards. "Get on out." Lydia walked straight to the counter and slapped one of the heavy gold coins onto the wood. The sound made Croft jump. "I need a dress," Lydia said, her voice raspy from disuse. "A good one. Silk, if you have it. Shoes. And soap. Lots of soap." Croft's eyes widened at the gold. His manner instantly shifted from hostility to greasy subservience. "Right away, ma'am. Right away. Got a blue shipment in from St. Louis just last week. Real fine quality." He bustled into the back room. Lydia waited, her heart hammering. On the wall behind the counter, plastered among advertisements for patent medicines and cattle auctions, was a hand-drawn poster. Missing. Lydia Sterling. Believed to be wandering and bereft of her senses. Reward for information leading to her safe return to Tucson Asylum. Contact Arthur Sterling. She stared at her own name, bereft of her senses. Arthur was thorough. Croft emerged with an armful of sapphire blue fabric. He laid it on the counter, then paused, looking from the dress to Lydia, and then to the poster on the wall behind her. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "Say," Croft leaned in, his breath sour. "You got a look about you, a familiar look. That gold, that ain't squaw money. Where'd you get it?" "That's none of your business," Lydia said coldly. "Take the coin for the dress. I'm leaving." She reached for the fabric, but Croft grabbed her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. "I think it is my business," Croft leered. "Mr. Sterling is offering a mighty fine reward for his runaway wife. $500. That's a lot more than one Spanish coin." Lydia didn't pull away. She didn't scream. The old Lydia would have fainted. The new Lydia remembered the cold cabin. She remembered the wolf in the snow. With her free hand, she reached under the buffalo robe and drew the heavy Colt cavalry pistol. She jammed the barrel hard under Croft's chin, snapping his head back. Croft froze, his eyes bulging. "Let go," Lydia whispered. It wasn't a plea. It was a death sentence. Croft released her wrist instantly, throwing his hands up. "Now, Mum. Now, Mrs. Sterling. No need for hasty actions. I was just joking." "The dress," Lydia commanded. "The shoes, the soap. Put them in a sack." Croft, trembling, did as he was told, moving with frantic speed. "Now," Lydia said, taking the sack with one hand, keeping the gun leveled with the other. "You're going to go into that back room and lock the door from the inside. If I hear you come out before I ride away, I will put a hole in your lung. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mum. Yes, I do." He scurried into the back room. Lydia heard the lock click. She holstered the weapon, grabbed a handful of jerky from a jar on the counter for good measure, and walked out the door. She rode out of Benson with her head held high. When she crested the ridge where Tarzay was waiting, the sun was setting behind her, casting a long shadow. Tarzay watched her approach. He saw the sack tied to her saddle horn. He saw the set of her jaw. "Did you find what you needed?" he asked. Lydia looked back at the town, a smouldering fire in her green eyes. "I found more than clothes, Tarzay. I found out that I don't need you to save me anymore." Tarzay nodded, a rare, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Good, because where we go next, I cannot hold your hand." Tucson rose from the desert floor like a heat mirage, a sprawling grid of adobe and timber shimmering under the relentless Arizona sun. To the casual observer, the city was a beacon of progress and civilization in a savage land. To Lydia Sterling, watching from the shade of a mesquite grove 2 miles out, it looked like the mouth of a trap. She stood beside the horse trough at the abandoned waypoint, scrubbing the red dust of the Dragoon Mountains from her skin. The water was tepid and stagnant, but it was enough to wash away the war paint of soot and grease she had worn for weeks. She stripped off the buckskins, garments that had kept her alive when silk would have killed her, and folded them reverently. They were the skin of the survivor. Now she had to put on the skin of the victim. She slipped into the sapphire blue dress she had purchased in Benson. It was fine silk, imported from the East, the kind of dress Arthur liked to see her in. It was meant to make her look decorative and fragile. But as she buttoned the bodice, she realized the fit was wrong. She had lost the soft curves of the pampered socialite. Her waist was thinner, but her shoulders were harder, the muscles defined from chopping wood and hauling water. The dress hung slightly loose, but it didn't matter. She pulled her blonde hair back, twisting it into a severe, elegant bun, using water to slick down the flyaways until her face was revealed, gaunt, sharp-angled, and terrifyingly calm. Tarzay sat on his horse 10 yards away, watching her transformation with impassive black eyes. He did not look at her with lust. He looked at her with the critical eye of a weaponsmith inspecting a blade. "You look like them again," Tarzay said, his voice low, blending with the rustle of the wind in the sagebrush. Lydia turned to him. She smoothed the silk skirt, hiding the heavy bruises on her legs. She checked the small Derringer pistol secured in the lace garter on her thigh. It was a toy compared to the Colt, but it was all she could hide. "I may look like them, Tarzay," she said, her voice devoid of the trembling fear that had once defined her. "But I am not one of them. Not anymore. I am the thing they forgot to kill." Tarzay nodded, a slow, solemn dip of his chin. He gestured toward the city, where distant church bells were already beginning to toll, marking the hour. "The wedding is at high noon. You have the sun on your back. Ride fast." "And you?" Lydia asked, a sudden pang of anxiety hitting her. The Apache warrior had been her anchor in the storm. Entering the city alone felt like stepping off a cliff. "I will be where the hawk watches," he said cryptically. "If the city tries to swallow you, I will break its teeth." He turned his paint horse and vanished into the brush without a sound. Lydia was alone. She mounted the stolen mare and rode toward the city gates. As she entered the thoroughfares of Tucson, the atmosphere shifted from the quiet of the desert to a chaotic carnival. The city was dressed for a coronation. Banners of red, white, and blue draped from the balconies of the saloons and hotels. Carriages polished to a mirror, sheen clattered over the cobblestones, carrying men in top hats and women in parasols toward the Cathedral of St. Augustine. Lydia kept her head high, affecting the haughty, distant expression of the aristocracy. She saw men pause on the boardwalks, squinting at her. She saw the flash of recognition, followed immediately by confusion. "Is that—" No, it couldn't be. Lydia Sterling is dead. A mad woman lost to the winter. She rode past them, a ghost in blue silk, refusing to acknowledge their stares. Her destination wasn't the church. Not yet. She tied her horse a block away from the First Territorial Bank. The building was a fortress of red brick and iron bars, a temple to the new god of the West, money. This was where Arthur's power lay, not in his charm, but in the ledger books. Lydia pushed open the heavy oak doors. The air inside was cool and smelled of ink, paper, and floor wax. The noise of the street faded to a dull hum. Tellers behind brass cages paused in their counting. Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, sat at a large mahogany desk in the corner, reviewing a stack of foreclosure notices. He was a small, nervous man who sweated profusely even in winter. He looked up as the shadow fell across his desk. His spectacles slid down his nose. His mouth opened, worked silently for a moment, and then he let out a strangled squeak. Mrs. Sterling?" He stood up so fast his chair tipped over with a loud clatter. "Good heavens! We were told. The memorial service is next week." "The rumors of my demise were greatly exaggerated, Mr. Henderson," Lydia said. She didn't shout. She didn't smile. She spoke with a glacial authority that froze the man in his tracks. She swept past the gate and took the seat opposite his desk, crossing her legs. "I have been convalescing in the high country. My husband worries so much. He tends to panic. But Arthur said you were bereft of your senses," Henderson stammered, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "He said you were dangerous." "Does this look dangerous to you, Mr. Henderson?" Lydia gestured to her fine dress, her composed posture. "I am here to retrieve my jewelry for the wedding. I intend to surprise my husband. It would be a shame if I couldn't wear my father's pearls." "The safety deposit box." Henderson hesitated. "Mr. Sterling gave strict orders. The accounts are frozen pending the probate." Lydia leaned forward, her green eyes locked onto his, and for a moment Henderson felt like he was looking into the eyes of a wolf he had cornered. "The box is in the name of Josiah Chambers, my father," she whispered. "It belongs to me. Not Arthur. If you deny me access, I will walk out that door and find Marshal Dillon. I will tell him you are conspiring to steal my inheritance while the governor is in town. Imagine the scandal, Mr. Henderson. A bank run on the day of the wedding?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Henderson paled. He knew the fragility of reputation in this town. "No need for that, Mrs. Sterling," he squeaked. "Right this way. Just a misunderstanding." He led her into the vault. The heavy steel door swung open on silent hinges. He fumbled with his keys, unlocked box 402, and placed the long metal drawer on the table. I'll give you some privacy," he muttered, backing out and closing the gate. Lydia's hands, steady until now, began to tremble. She opened the lid. There were bonds, stacks of currency, and the pearls. But at the bottom lay a thick envelope, sealed with red wax. Her father's seal. She broke the wax and unfolded the letter. Her father's handwriting was shaky, written days before his sudden heart attack. "My dearest Lydia, Arthur is not the man we thought. He is drowning in debt to investors in Chicago. He needs the ranch. He needs the water rights. He has threatened me, Lydia. If I die, know that it was him. The deed enclosed is the original. Hide it. Run." A tear leaked from Lydia's eye, splashing onto the paper. It wasn't sadness. It was the final solidification of her hatred. Arthur hadn't just tried to kill her. He had murdered the only man who had ever loved her. She tucked the deed and the letter into her bodice, against her skin. It felt like armor. She composed herself and stepped out of the vault. Mr. Henderson was waiting, but he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the front door. Blocking the sunlight was a massive figure. Sheriff Grady, Arthur's lapdog, a man with a badge on his chest and a bribe in his pocket. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his gun belt, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Well, I'll be damned," Grady drawled, his voice booming in the quiet bank. "Arthur told me to keep an eye out for crazy women crashing the party, but I didn't think the ghost would actually show up." Mr. Henderson pressed himself against the wall. "Sheriff, she claims." "She claims a lot of things," Grady interrupted, stepping closer, his spurs jingling. "Arthur says she's mad as a hatter. Says she needs to be in a padded room." I'm inclined to agree. He pulled a pair of iron handcuffs from his belt. "Make this easy, Lydia. Turn around." Lydia didn't move. Her hand hovered near her thigh, near the hidden derringer. But Grady was fast, and he had his hand on his Colt. "Get out of my way, Grady," she said. "Can't do that, darling," Grady sneered. "I got a $500 bonus waiting for me if I deliver you to the asylum before the vows are read. You're my retirement fund." He reached for her arm. Suddenly, the world outside exploded. Boom! The shockwave rattled the teeth in Lydia's skull. The large plate glass window at the front of the bank shattered inward, showering the lobby with shards. A cloud of black smoke rolled past the door. Screams erupted from the street. "What in the hell?" Grady spun around, his hand flying to his gun. His attention snapped toward the chaos at the livery stable across the street. "I will break its teeth," Tarzay had said. Lydia didn't hesitate. She didn't scream. She didn't cower. She grabbed the heavy brass coin tray from the teller's counter, a solid slab of metal filled with silver dollars. With a grunt of exertion, she swung it with both hands. Crack! The edge of the brass tray connected with the back of Sheriff Grady's skull. It was a sickening sound. The sheriff's knees buckled instantly. He collapsed face first onto the floor, unconscious before he hit the wood. Mr. Henderson shrieked, covering his mouth. Lydia stood over the fallen lawman. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She adjusted the sapphire dress, smoothing the silk over her hips. She looked at Henderson, who was trembling like a leaf. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice eerily calm amidst the ringing in her ears. "You never saw me. The sheriff slipped. Do you understand?" Henderson nodded frantically, unable to speak. Lydia stepped over Grady's body, crunching on broken glass. She walked out the door and into the smoke-filled street. Through the haze, the bells of the cathedral began to chime high noon. 12 strikes. The wedding was starting, and Lydia Sterling was finally ready to walk down the aisle. The Cathedral of St. Augustine was a sanctuary of cool stone and colored glass, a stark fortress against the blistering Arizona sun. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of beeswax candles and expensive perfume. The entire social hierarchy of the territory was packed into the pews. At the front, near the altar, stood Governor Tritle, looking impatient in his heavy wool suit. Beside him stood the bride, Eleanor Vance, a vision in white lace imported from Paris, her face obscured by a veil, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a bouquet of white lilies. And there was Arthur Sterling. He stood tall and handsome in a charcoal frock coat, his hair slicked back with fragrant oil. He looked the part of the grieving widower finding new hope. He looked like a man who had won. As the organ music swelled, vibrating through the floorboards, Arthur allowed himself a small, secret smile. The deed was done. The cabin in the mountains was buried under snow. His troublesome, barren wife was a frozen memory. In 10 minutes, he would be the son-in-law of a copper magnate and the most powerful man in the territory. The priest, Father Magno, cleared his throat. The organ music faded to a reverent silence. "Dearly beloved," the priest intoned, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Boom. The sound wasn't thunder. It was the heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral slamming open with such force that the hinges groaned. A collective gasp swept through the congregation. Heads turned, necks craned. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the blinding white light of the noon sun and the black smoke drifting from the livery stable fire, stood a figure. It was not a guest. Lydia Sterling stepped out of the light and into the shadows of the nave. The sapphire blue dress she had bought in Benson was stained with the dust of the road, the hem torn from spurring her horse. Her boots were scuffed. Her blonde hair, usually pinned in the intricate curls of a lady, was pulled back severely, revealing a face that had been stripped of all softness. Her skin was tanned by the high-altitude sun, her lips chapped, her eyes burning with a green fire that seemed to scorch the air. She walked down the center aisle. Her boot heels clicked rhythmically on the stone floor. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a clock counting down. A murmur of confusion rippled through the pews. "Is that—" "It can't be. She looks like a ghost." Arthur Sterling turned. The color drained from his face so fast it looked as if he had been bled. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He gripped the altar railing to keep from collapsing. Lydia didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the governor. She didn't look at the terrified bride. Her eyes were locked on Arthur. She stopped 10 paces from the altar. The silence in the church was absolute. "Lydia," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. "My God. Lydia!" He was a master manipulator, and even in his shock, his instincts kicked in. He rushed forward, arms outstretched, performing the role of the relieved husband. "Lydia, you're alive!" he cried, pitching his voice so the back rows could hear. "Oh, thank heavens! We thought the fever had taken you. We thought you had wandered off into the canyons in your madness." He reached for her, intending to embrace her and likely whisper a threat in her ear. Lydia didn't flinch. She simply raised her right hand. In it, she held the heavy Colt dragoon pistol she had taken from the cabin. She leveled the barrel at the center of Arthur's chest. The crowd screamed. Women fainted. The governor ducked behind a pew. Marshal Dillon, who had been standing near the vestry, stepped forward, his hand moving to his own gun. "Stay back, Arthur," Lydia said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. It was the voice of the wind in the Dragoon Mountains. "If you take one more step, I will put a bullet in your heart." "Lydia, darling, please," Arthur stammered, holding his hands up, playing to the audience. "You're not well. You're having one of your episodes. Put the gun down. Let us help you. Dr. Holloway is here." "There is no madness, Arthur," Lydia said, her hand rock steady. "There is only the truth, and the truth is freezing cold." She reached into her bodice with her free hand and pulled out the envelope. She threw it onto the floor at the governor's feet. "Read it, Governor," she commanded. Governor Tritle, pale and sweating, hesitated. Then, driven by curiosity and the gun in Lydia's hand, he picked up the envelope. He broke the wax seal, the seal of Josiah Chambers, and unfolded the letter. "Lydia, stop this!" Arthur roared, his facade cracking. "She's insane! She forged it! Sheriff, where is Sheriff Grady?" "The sheriff is sleeping," Lydia said coldly, "and you are done lying." She turned her gaze to the stunned bride, Eleanor Vance, who was cowering behind her veil. "He didn't love you, Eleanor," Lydia said, her voice softening slightly. "He needed your father's money because he squandered my inheritance. And he needed a new wife because he thought I couldn't give him an heir." Lydia placed her hand on her stomach. But he was wrong about that, too. The implication hit the room like a physical blow, a collective intake of breath. Arthur stared at her stomach, his eyes wide with horror. "You're," Arthur whispered. "Pregnant," Lydia confirmed. "I tried to tell you, but you were too busy locking me in a line shack with no food and no heat. You left your wife and your unborn child to be eaten by wolves, Arthur. All for a railroad contract." The governor looked up from the letter, his face purple with rage. He looked at Arthur with absolute disgust. "Sterling," the governor boomed, "this letter, it details the forgery of the land deed. It details the threats against Josiah's life. Is this true?" "It's a lie," Arthur screamed, backing away toward the altar. "She's a witch. She's turned you all against me." Desperation seized him. Arthur realized the game was over. The socialite mask fell away, revealing the rat underneath. He lunged, not at Lydia, but at Eleanor. He grabbed the screaming bride by the hair, pulling her in front of him as a human shield, and drew a small, silver-plated pistol from his coat pocket. "Back off!" Arthur shrieked, pressing the gun to Eleanor's temple. "I'm walking out of here. Anyone follows me, the girl dies!" Marshal Dillon froze. The governor froze. Lydia stood her ground, the heavy Colt still aimed. But she couldn't shoot. Eleanor was in the way. "You're pathetic, Arthur," Lydia said, her voice dripping with venom. "Hiding behind another woman." "Shut up!" Arthur yelled, dragging the sobbing Eleanor toward the side door of the vestry. "I'll kill her, I swear it." He was 5 feet from the door, 5 feet from freedom. Suddenly, a high-pitched whistling sound cut through the air, followed by a sickening thud. Arthur screamed. His hand, the one holding the gun, was suddenly pinned to the heavy wooden door frame by a long, black-fletched arrow. The gun clattered to the floor. Arthur stared at his hand, impaled by the shaft, his mind unable to process the violence. Eleanor scrambled away, weeping. High above, in the open window of the choir loft, a shadow moved. Just for a second. A flash of red headband, a streak of ochre paint. Then, it was gone. Lydia didn't look up. She knew who was there. Marshal Dillon didn't hesitate. He tackled Arthur Sterling, driving him into the stone floor. 2 deputies rushed in, securing Arthur's arms. The grieving widower was dragged away, howling in pain and cursing the name of Lydia Sterling. The church was chaos. People were shouting, crying, running for the exits. Lydia lowered the gun. She felt the adrenaline draining out of her, leaving her legs weak. She swayed. Marshal Dillon, having handed Arthur off to his men, walked over to her. He looked at the arrow still vibrating in the doorframe. He looked at the open window in the loft. Then he looked at Lydia. "That was a hell of a shot," the marshal said quietly. "Apache make. Chiricahua, if I'm not mistaken." Lydia met his gaze. "I didn't see anything, Marshal." Dillon studied her face. He saw the scars on her hands. He saw the fire that had forged her. He was a man who knew the difference between law and justice. "Neither did I, Mrs. Sterling," Dillon said, tipping his hat. "Neither did I." The trial of Arthur Sterling was the sensation of the decade. The testimony of the bank manager, the unconscious Sheriff Grady, and the discovery of Silas Pike and his men tied up in the Dragoon Mountains painted a picture of greed and villainy that shocked the territory. Arthur was sentenced to hang. He died screaming, a coward to the end. Lydia did not attend the hanging. She was back at the Sterling Ranch, now the Chambers Ranch, renamed in honor of her father. 6 months had passed. The spring wildflowers were blooming, painting the desert floor in purples and golds. Lydia sat on the porch of the main house, rocking a wooden cradle. Inside slept a baby boy. She had named him Leo, for the strength of a lion. She ran the ranch alone. The workers respected her. They had heard the stories. They knew she had survived the winter in a death trap. They knew she had walked into a church and taken down a tycoon. They didn't cross her. The sun was setting, casting long purple shadows across the valley. Lydia watched the tree line. She did this every evening. And then she saw him. He was on the ridge, silhouetted against the dying sun. He sat atop a paint horse, motionless as a statue. Taze! He didn't come down to the house. He never did. The world of the white eyes was not his world. He was a warrior of the wind, a ghost of the mountains. But he watched. He checked. Lydia stood up and walked to the edge of the porch railing. She raised her hand, palm open. A silent greeting. A silent thank you. On the ridge the warrior raised his rifle high above his head, a salute to the woman who had walked into the fire and come out steel. Then he turned his horse and vanished into the twilight. Lydia smiled. She wasn't afraid of the coming night. She wasn't afraid of the winter. She looked down at her son, sleeping peacefully. "Sleep well, Leo," she whispered. "The wolves won't bother us. We are the wolves now." She turned and walked back into the warmth of her home, closing the door firmly against the dark. And that, my friends, is the legend of Lydia Sterling, the woman who refused to be a victim and became a vengeance. It's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is leave a survivor behind. If you enjoyed this tale of Wild West justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. What did you think of Taze's choice to stay in the shadows? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep the campfire burning.